Do you want to wake up feeling like you're stepping into who you're meant to be, into the best possible version of you? What if I told you that the key to your best life, health, and happiness are all around you? You just have to find what works for you. I'm Hope Pedraza, and I believe that there isn't just one way to live a healthy and meaningful life, and that all you need is a little inspiration to make changes that last from the inside out. Each week, I'll be sharing tangible tips and inspirational interviews to help you on your journey. These are the steps to take to improve your life and live with purpose. This is Hopeful and Wholesome. Okay, let's talk about how emotional stress and or trauma shows up on the labs. And you know, I'm one to talk a lot about how emotions get stored in our body, and it's something that I help my clients with as we work through these emotional parts that get stored in the body. And I think it's one thing to say that and to be like, yeah, it makes sense. But I know there also is this other school of thinking that's like, well, like, what's the evidence, right? Like, how does this physically show up on the labs for me to know that this stuff is stored in my body? So the thing is, first and foremost, it's important to understand that you cannot separate the physical and the energetic body. Like, you just can't. I think most of us know now that we cannot compartmentalize these pieces of us, the physical, the emotional, the mental, the spiritual, all these. We cannot compartmentalize those. We cannot separate this. We are a whole being, and all of these parts of us, mental, emotional, physical, spiritual, all of these are tied together. And so, yes, emotions are part of this. Emotions and energy. And I will say those words interchangeably, just so you know. I will say those words interchangeably. Emotions are energy in motion. So it is energy. It is meant to be moving. Emotions are meant to move. It's supposed to be energy in motion. So to me, it's one and the same. It's just energy that needs to move through the bodies is what emotions are. And so when we're looking at how this shows up physically on the body, I think on a mental level, we do understand this piece that when you have an emotional response to a situation or whatever, like, there is a physiological response to that too, right? We can recognize that your heart rate changes and you get like a sick feeling in your gut, and maybe you feel your muscles tense, right? There's a physiological response to that. And so I think we know, like, in the moment, there is this physical response to what's happening to whatever emotional situation is going on. But it's also important to understand that this can also start this emotional event, circumstance, whatever, trauma can also start this cascade of things that happens after the fact. And especially when we don't allow those emotions to continue doing what they need to do, which is move through the body. And that's really what trauma is. Trauma is we stop the emotion from ourselves completing feeling that full emotion that happens in the moment, whether that's big T, little t trauma. I've said this before, I'll say it a million times. Your body doesn't know the difference, right? Your body doesn't know the difference between big T, little t trauma. Trauma is trauma in the body. I'm not minimizing anybody's, trauma that they've dealt with, but I'm just saying how your body recognizes it. It doesn't know the difference. And so there's going to be a physiological response regardless of how big or little the trauma is, because it's just how your body's recognizing it. And yes, some people are more sensitive to traumas, big T, little t traumas, than others. Some things might be a big T trauma to somebody, but a little t trauma to somebody else, right? It all depends on what's happening in the body and kind of what state your body is at the moment when the emotional thing happens. So what I want to explain today is how this shows up on the labs and how this creates this environment of kind of just imbalances and dysfunction in the body from these emotional events that happen. So there's things that we can look at. And here's the thing with the work that I do, this is why I like putting all the pieces together. With the work that I do, I want to see, and I asked, because I had a call with a gal yesterday and we were talking about this. And she ended up jumping into the quantum reset. We're talking through all the physical things, and then I start asking her, we kind of start talking about stress and things, and then all these other things come out. She starts telling me about there's some strained family dynamics and things that have happened in her personal life, and there's all these things. And so then we look back and trace back to when some of the symptoms that she had started. It was in this period of time and all of these things happened, right? So a lot of times we can do that. We can trace back to when these things started happening, going wrong in the body. We usually trace it back to, it might not have been one specific event, but it could have been like this series of events that happened in a relatively short amount of time that just causes chain reaction of things. So my point is, what I like to look at with my clients, I like to look at the physical things. Like, yes, tell me your physical symptoms. I'm not saying they matter in terms of it helps me figure out, okay, where are these other things being stored in the body? So yeah, I want to know about your headaches, your high blood pressure, your anxiety, your depression, your gut issues, your constipation, your heart, like all these things are going to give me clues as to where these emotional, energetic things are stored in the body. So the big part of the physical part of what I do is looking at the labs, right? And seeing how is this showing up in the labs. And there's some very specific things that show up on the labs that I wanted to share with you today for you to be able to see, like, very analytically, like, this is the data that is indicating that there is some sort of emotional stress or trauma that had happened at some point that triggered a lot of these physical imbalances, dysfunction to happen in the body. So the three foundational labs that I do, the hair tissue mineral analysis, or HTMA, the GI map, which is a comprehensive gut test, and then the Dutch test, which is a really comprehensive hormone test. And there's specific things in each of those that I'm going to call out today and kind of like physically what to do about it. Now, let me say this too as a caveat before I jump into that. Physically, yes. Physically, there are things we can do to help with the minerals and the gut stuff and all of that. But if you're not going in and doing that, the real inner work of uncovering where the emotions and the trauma is stored in the body, then it's only going to do so much. So I'm not going to go deep into that because I talk about it all the time, and you can go back to look at some other live trainings where I go deeper into that and how you help release these things. But I feel like I always have to make that caveat because I don't want to be talking about all of these physical things and what you can do, and people think like this is going to fix everything. And then when it doesn't, they're like, what the heck? You said this would fix it. Like that's not what I mean. So there is a combination of things that has to happen for you to really get to the root cause. But I want to talk about the physical pieces today so you can have an idea of some of the things you can do to help your physical body, while of course addressing the emotional energetic piece on the other side. So starting with the HTMA, for me, the hair tissue mineral analysis gives some of the best indication. There are specific minerals that are thrown out of balance and out of whack when an emotional, stressful thing happens. That is very clear on an HTMA. And I can look at someone's HTMA and on some level almost immediately know, like either they've been in a chronic emotional, stressful situation for a while, or there was some acute trauma that's happened that they haven't dealt with. Like I can almost tell right away. And there's a few different minerals to look at. So first and foremost, and I've mentioned this in a couple of my posts before because I had a client recently that this was one of the big things at work, and I've had multiple clients that we've worked through this piece, but it's the calcium. The elevated calcium in the tissue. Now, this isn't the same thing as going to get a blood lab and looking at your calcium levels there. This is a different thing. Calcium is a structural mineral, meaning it's supposed to be held in your bones and your teeth. 99% of it is supposed to be in your bones and in your teeth. When it has been pushed out into your tissues is when it's a problem, because it's not supposed to be there, first of all. And when it gets put, you think of like calcification in your arteries, right? This we don't want it there either, right? You think about calcification, you think of things like bone spurs. It's like a calcification buildup, right? Calcium buildup. So you think about that. It's not supposed to be there. It's supposed to be in your bones and your teeth. And so when calcium is super elevated on an HTMA, hair tissue mineral analysis, this is a problem. Typically with this, I'm not saying there's one reason. There's multiple reasons why this can happen. But a lot of times what happens when you are in, especially if it's like an acute trauma, like an acute situation, emotional situation that happened, or if it's a chronic one too, same. When you have a stressful situation, what happens physiologically in the body, right? You have this surge of adrenaline and cortisol, right? Well, your body knows that like cortisol is a stress response. And so it kind of releases this protective mechanism, releases calcium, kind of pulls the calcium from the teeth and the bones as a protective mechanism. So not too much cortisol goes into your cells. It's to protect yourself from too much like cortisol overload. So it sends the calcium there as a protective mechanism. And so calcium builds this kind of protective shell around your cells. And if we haven't dealt with that, then it kind of just sticks around. And so I have clients come to me fairly often that have really elevated calcium. And like I said, there could be multiple reasons, but a lot of times this is the reason. And we'll end up having conversations about it. There's this trauma thing that happened. There's this stressful thing that's been happening for a while. Like it could be acute, it could be chronic, but either way, the stressful thing has caused kind of this calcium buildup in the body. And so when it builds around the cells and the tissues, it's keeping things from going in and out of your cells. So things like your thyroid hormone that needs to go into your cells. Every one of your cells has receptors for your thyroid hormone. Well, now our thyroid's not working properly because the thyroid hormone can get into your cells. Potassium, sodium, like all these minerals that are supposed to be going in and out of your cells, it's not happening. Think about when you have this calcification around nerves and stuff, right? Nerve signaling, how your brain's functioning. I had a client before who was about to get on ADHD medicine and like swore she had ADHD. We looked at HMA and I'm like, girlfriend, no wonder you can't think at all. Like her calcium was through the roof. So yeah, of course, brain fog, like memory issues. Sometimes it can even be like, it can even like alter kind of how you're acting and just kind of feeling kind of emotionally numb. Like it's kind of just blocking how things are functioning all up in your brain and the chemicals that are getting there, the neurotransmitters that are supposed to be working, right? It blocks a lot of things from happening. So calcium is a big one. And this is a big sign to me that there has been some sort of emotional stress, emotional trauma that's happened that A, we need to address where that's being stored in the body, but B, like we also need to adjust the calcium part and get that calcium. So it's called a calcium shell. We need to break that calcium shell. So how do we do this? Well, first of all, you want things to help the calcium go back where it needs to go. So vitamin K is a big one. And I will say this, just like tiny side note, I want to go too far into it. I have podcast episodes about this, but when you're taking vitamin D, this is another thing. You should never take vitamin D by itself. Vitamin D should always be taken with vitamin K. So it's D3, K2, always those together. Vitamin D can stimulate the release of calcium from the bones and push it out into your tissues. So this is another reason why we can find this buildup of calcium in the tissues because we're taking vitamin D by itself. And especially if you're taking super high doses of vitamin D, which a lot of doctors are recommending right now. And I'm not a huge fan of because they're just taking 10,000 IU of vitamin D with no vitamin K. So the vitamin K is shuttling the vitamin D where it needs to go. So anyway, that's a caveat or a little side note. So vitamin K is going to be a big one to help break up the calcium shell. It's going to push it where it needs to go. Things like boron. Boron is another cofactor that helps push it where it needs to go. And then again, of course, addressing the stress. And we also want to balance out other minerals, and magnesium is a big one. And that's the next one that I want to mention is magnesium. So magnesium is a really important mineral, and it's crucial for 500 to 600 different reactions in the body. And because so many of our bodily functions require magnesium, it's very easily depleted. And our adrenals use a lot of magnesium and a lot of sodium. So our adrenals are going to run through our stores really quickly when they're overtaxed, overworked, right? And so this is another one that is another sign for me that there's some sort of emotional stress trauma that has gone on or is going on, is the magnesium. And this is another, the calcium magnesium kind of go together here because we typically, we also want to support magnesium when the calcium is super elevated. So magnesium, if we're looking at an HMA, it's going to look multiple ways. It could look super high on an HMA because remember, it's measuring your hair tissue. So if magnesium is being pushed out into the tissues, it's biounavailable, like your body can't use it. Or if it's super low on the lab, then it's super low, right? So we want to support magnesium stores and we want to get those back up. So the thing with magnesium, some things I find that people, I don't want to say do wrong because that sounds bad, but not best practices. Maybe I'll say it like that for magnesium. First of all, not taking the right form. A lot of forms aren't absorbed by the body very well. Like if you're taking magnesium citrate, you're basically taking a laxative. Like your body's absorbing very little of that. And if I'm ever asking somebody to take that, it's just because they're constipated. It's not because we want to support magnesium stores. So they sell the magnesium citrate all over the place, which drives me crazy. It comes in the powder form and you put it in your water and you drink it. And it's like, be calm and all this stuff. And it's like, no, it's literally just a laxative. Like you're absorbing like maybe 20 to 30% of that. So first is the right form. You want to look for glycinate. Sometimes it's bisglycinate, threonate. There's some interesting studies around threonate. So I usually just say glycinate. Like glycinate is the go-to. So you're looking for a magnesium glycinate. The other thing is the amount. Most of the time, if it's in a multivitamin or a lot of times just by itself, like you're looking at maybe 150, maybe 250 milligrams, which is not enough. The ideal amount is going to be 5 times your body weight. So for an average person, it's going to be anywhere like an average size person, like 500 to 700 milligrams or so, like maybe more. And so, and this is one of those, let me say this too, magnesium, which knows you can't really OD on magnesium. So taking too much is not really, like you can take too much vitamin D. That's a real thing. Like you can take too much, like there's other things you can, but magnesium is not one of them. Sometimes people need more. And I work with my clients a lot on finding the right spot for them. For me, I have been like experimenting on this with myself over the past handful of months. And I find for me, 1,000 to 1,500 milligrams is what I take to feel a difference. And so that means like, it's going to help with sleep and your energy and that kind of thing. So you kind of have to play around with it too and figure out, because I find a lot of times if you're taking it and you're like, this isn't working at all, like we need to adjust the dose. And especially if, you're in a stressful situation, you're dealing with stress, you're trying to manage stress, you're in a stressful part of your life, like all that kind of stuff plays into how quickly you're running through your magnesium source. So my point is looking at the type, looking at like the form and looking at how much you're taking, the dosage, the milligrams is going to be a huge factor in how your body is absorbing and using magnesium and supporting your magnesium stores. 2 other minerals that show up out of balance on an HTMA, that's a really good indication for me that there's some sort of emotional stress, trauma. Sodium is another one, and I mentioned it briefly a second ago, but sodium is one of those that I have a ton. And if you're watching this and you want the podcast episode, just comment below like sodium and I'll send you the episode. I have a whole episode of my rant on sodium. So I'm not going to get into it here, but sodium, your body needs sodium. And I know we've been conditioned with the whole like low sodium diet and sodium makes you have heart attacks and all this stuff. And I'll say this at least, it's not about the sodium itself. It's about the form of sodium that we're getting. Like that's what it is. And so our body needs sodium. Our adrenals use more sodium than any other part of the body. So when your adrenals are stressed out, which means you are stressed out, you being stressed out it stresses out your adrenals. It's constantly pumping out the sodium. You have to replenish those sodium supplies. Sodium, magnesium, both of these are going to be drained the quickest when your adrenals are overworked, or they're tired, they're exhausted or worn out or burned out, whatever, right? So sodium is another of those that we want to support. And so when I'm looking at HMA and the sodium is like super duper duper low, which happens a lot, that's a really good indication that, there's either some acute trauma stress that happened, or there's this chronic stress, emotional stress that's happening that is depleting sodium stores. And that's going to cause a lot of issues in the body. Things like headaches is a big one. I'd say that's probably the first one with headaches. Things going on like memory issues. This is what most of my clients experience. Memory issues, brain fog. They're just like thinking clearly. A lot of times that is affected by sodium stores, but it's really in fatigue, this overall fatigue, right? But think about, what happens when you're stressed and the feelings you have. Like it's just kind of exacerbate that. The last one I want to mention is copper. I also have a whole episode in my podcast about copper if you want to dive deeper into copper. But copper is one of these. This is an interesting mineral because we need it. We need copper, but then there's a line because there is such thing as too much. There's such a thing as copper toxicity, which affects a lot of people. And again, a whole other conversation. But when we're looking at copper, and copper is a little bit complicated on an HTMA, which is why you want somebody to look at the labs that knows how to interpret. The labs is just looking at the labs and look at your copper levels is not going to really tell you much, but there's a lot of other things we have to look at when looking at, are you copper toxic? Are you copper deficient? Because being copper, if you look at the lab, and sometimes if the copper shows super low on your lab, at first glance, you're like, oh, I'm depleted, like my stores of copper depleted, but it could also mean that it's bio unavailable. And a lot of times when the toxicity builds up, the copper is stored in your liver and in your brain. So once the liver gets filled up, it goes to your brain. And this is how it can cause real issues. Like there are studies about copper, and people who have like violent, aggressive behavior and copper levels in their body, like there's studies about that. So copper really does affect you at a lot of levels. How you like neurologically, how you're functioning, how your organs are functioning. So there's a lot of things that can affect. But with copper, when your adrenals have to really be working well for you to be able to filter out excess copper and like release, like detox excess copper. So if your adrenals are worn out, they're tired, they're overworked, then the copper is going to get stored up in the body because the adrenals aren't working hard enough to be able to help you release that. So this is one of those, again, that kind of goes with all of these really that I mentioned, the sodium, magnesium, calcium, all of these, because when you have been in an acute trauma or consistent, chronic emotional stress, this is going to affect how your adrenals are working and how things like copper is being able to be released from the body. And there's this whole cascade of effects that also happens when copper gets built up in the body and you get this copper toxicity. This is a pretty big deal when we can't get rid of copper. There's a lot of other things that happen after that. So those are probably the big four that I would look at. Calcium, magnesium, sodium, and copper are some of the big ones I would look at and be able to tell, like, okay, we need to look at what's going on emotionally in your body, in your life. This is when we need to go into work, like with my quantum healing sessions, and figure out, like, where are these things? Where's the trauma being stored? The emotions being stored? Are there patterns? That's the other thing. Are there like emotional patterns that are perpetuating this? Because I think that's the big thing to think about too. Like there's one thing for it to be an acute trauma, right? This instance that happened, that was a big trauma to the body. It's another thing for you to have certain patterns where it's basically like repeating that little t trauma over and over again, right? It's the limiting beliefs, it's the self-talk, it's the toxic relationships, it's the toxic work environment, it's the overworking, it's the perfectionism, it's the like imposter syndrome. Like all of these things are patterns, and these thoughts evoke certain emotions in the body. And so you're infecting, that's the word that's coming up for me. You're reinfecting your body with these emotions every time you have these thoughts, every time you get into these patterns. And so again, it's like re-traumatizing yourself every time all of these things come up. And so it's keeping yourself in this loop where these minerals, for example, are going to continue to be out of balance because we're stuck in those loops, we're stuck in those cycles. So that's a big thing that we work on in my quantum healing sessions, is identifying the patterns, and let's untangle the patterns. Like let's figure out how those patterns got there, which is why I love to tie in human design. So let's figure out how the patterns got there, and then let's untangle them, because the longer you stay in those patterns of the, perfectionism, overworking, all of those ones that I just listed, again, it's just literally re-traumatizing your body with those same emotions, those same chemicals over and over again. And it's keeping you in this loop that's keeping these minerals, like I've just talked about, out of balance. So that's what happens on the HTMA, the hair tissue mineral analysis. The other two, just a couple things to mention on the other two labs that I do. So the GMAP is the other one. The big things we look at there to see, is there the good indication of the emotional stress or trauma that's happened in the body. First is pathogens, parasites, it's bad stuff that's in your gut, basically is what it is. And so now, yes, this can totally happen from you drinking, dirty water, your dog licks your face. There's a lot of ways you can get parasites and pathogens in your gut, but it's not about the fact that it's not about the pathogen itself, the parasite itself. It's what made you a hospitable host for that pathogen. We are exposed to bacteria and pathogens all the freaking time, all the time. And our body is capable of getting rid of those things. But when you have this buildup of pathogens that's affecting how other parts of your physical body are working, then my question is, what made you the hospitable host for this pathogen to make a home there, right? And so typically it's, what has happened to the body that's created this kind of inflammatory environment for this pathogen to be like, yeah, I'm just going to hang out here for a while and just kind of, wreak havoc. So pathogens are a big thing. Pathogens, parasites. That client I mentioned earlier that had the big calcium shell, she thought she had ADHD. She had some other symptoms too that we worked with, a lot of them actually. And she had I want to say she had 3 parasites that showed up on her GMAP. So she had some serious gut stuff going on along with this calcium shell that was causing so many things to go wrong in her body. And a lot of it was just her in this chronic state of stress that we worked through. So pathogens are a big one. And on the GMAP, it also looks at a handful of different intestinal health markers. So there's different markers of how overall gut function, gut health, that kind of thing. So a couple big ones is there's one that measures your gut's immune system. They basically your immunity in your gut. So when that one is either super elevated or super low, there's something going on. If it's super elevated, there's something triggering an immune response in your body that's causing your gut's immune system to be alert, there's something bad. If it's super low, then it's something it's your immune system in your gut is struggling, right? Both of these are correlated to some sort of stress in the body had to start somewhere outside of the body. So really good indication that there's some sort of emotional stress that has happened or is currently happening, right? You're in kind of this chronic state, is what's happening with your gut's immune system. The other piece of that, another intestinal health marker, is it's called zonulin, but basically it's a measure of the integrity of your gut lining. And so you've probably heard of the term leaky gut before. It's a pretty common term. And there's some controversy around like the functional medicine world, the conventional medicine world. Like, is it a real thing? I'm telling you, it's a real thing. Like, leaky gut is basically, there's inflammation that happens in your body and it causes little perforations in the gut that causes undigested proteins to leak out into your body and cause inflammation. There are studies that are showing that, I think at this point it's up to like almost 90% of autoimmune disorders are caused by leaky gut. So how does leaky gut start? Now, there's multiple things. Again, like I said with some of the stuff in the HTMA, I'm not saying there's one thing that's causing leaky gut to happen. But what I can tell you is that it's kind of the similar concept of if you have pathogens, like what made you a hospitable host for those pathogens? Well, when you have leaky gut, right, there's something that made your gut lining become less, like more permeable, right? There's something that happened to break through that. There's some sort of inflammation that had to happen to kind of break through it. So in my experience and what I have seen with, I would say every one of my clients has had this, there is some sort of, again, there might be an acute traumatic event that happened, or there's this ongoing emotional stress that's happened that's causing things like leaky gut. So when you have leaky gut, this is like a whole cascade of effects. And I'm not saying this to like fearmonger or anything, but when you're looking at leaky gut, the thing is you want to catch it when you know you have it, because it can end up leading to things like, I'm not saying it's always going to go there, but it can end up leading to things like autoimmune disorders. And so it's not like one of those things where you're like, oh, I'll just wait for it to get better. Like, there's intentional steps to take to help rebuild the lining of your gut to stop it from getting any worse, right? It's to kind of stop it in its tracks and to heal the gut lining. And it's part of that is going to go back to managing stress, which I know is a really boring answer for people. And they're like, how do I help fix this? Managing stress is a big deal. And I also know that sometimes when you say manage stress, it sounds very like condescending, like, okay, like, but there are steps to take to build some more resiliency in your nervous system so that we're not promoting this inflammatory environment in the body. And so addressing stress and the emotional stress and releasing that. And that's why I work so much with my clients on releasing what's being stored there, because once it's there and we're not releasing it, you're just compounding the emotional response in the body. Like, all these emotions are being stored somewhere. And it's perpetuating this kind of inflammatory environment in the gut that makes you a hospitable host, or in the body, not necessarily gut, hospitable host for things like pathogens, leaky gut, etc. So the big things in the gut, like I said, recap: pathogens, the immune function of your gut, and then the zonulin, which is a marker of leaky gut, like, the looking at your gut's mucosal barrier. And so the last one I want to mention in the Dutch, remember, it's the comprehensive hormone test that I run. And the big one I look at, now there's multiple things there, because it's going to look at your sex hormones, your steroid hormones, but the big one I'm going to look at there is going to be your cortisol. Obviously, we talked about cortisol already in this little live training. But remember, cortisol, this is your stress hormone. So when you're stressed, your body's going to release cortisol. Now, the thing with cortisol is cortisol works in kind of this like bell curve thing, right? So first of all, let me say this too. Let me back up. We need cortisol. Like, our body needs cortisol. This is how we deal with stress. Like, our body is designed to be able to cope with stress, and the cortisol is meant to help us do that. The problem is, when we're chronically stressed, or we're like chronically, again, the patterns like I talked about, we're in these patterns, then your cortisol is constantly spiking. So it kind of runs in this bell curve. So your cortisol is going to be elevated. It's going to get to a point where it gets to the top of the hill here, and your adrenals are going to be like, I can't do it anymore. Like, I'm really tired. I can't give you any more. And you're going to come down that other side of the bell curve. And this is when we get into what's called an exhaustive phase. This is when your adrenals are now pumping out less and less and less cortisol. I can tell you from experience, when I went through my FDN training and I did all the labs myself, lo and behold, oh, this is why I'm getting sick so much. Like my adrenals were struggling for dear life. Like I was at the other end of the bell curve. So, and high performers, perfectionists, this is so common. Again, these are the patterns that happen that get us to this point. And because we just push and push and push and push, you can only push so far before your body's like, hold on, like I got no more to give you. And cortisol is going to be the indicator of that. So when I'm looking at the Dutch test, looking at cortisol, we're looking at the cortisol levels, like super duper low cortisol levels is this sign like, yeah, like you're in this exhaustive phase. You're either in this chronic state of emotional stress, or there could be an acute situation that's just kind of caused your body to kind of be in this, it's almost like your adrenals go into like this freeze state, right? You've heard of fight, flight, or freeze. And so your adrenals are kind of like, yeah, like I don't know what to do anymore. So I'm just going to start pumping out less because I've got nothing else to give. And so I think when we're looking at the cortisol, we're looking at on the lab itself, I look at the cortisol pattern and at the cortisol levels themselves to be able to see what's happening, like how are your adrenals functioning, and how is your stress level, emotional stress, how is that affecting how your adrenals are functioning. And so if we have like this crazy cortisol pattern where your cortisol is like all over the place, that's a good indication like something is going on. And then looking too at your overall levels, like if we're running super low cortisol, then that's a good indication like there's some sort of emotional thing that needs to be addressed. Whether this is a pattern, like I listed before, we talked about before, whether it's a pattern, there's an acute trauma, emotions, something that's stuck in the body that's kind of like shut down part of your functions of the body, which happens. It totally happens. So these are the big picture things. These are the big things we're looking at. How is emotional stress or trauma? Like, how does it show up on the labs? Because it's one thing for you to tell me about it. And like I mentioned, the gal that I was talking to yesterday, and she was listing all these things that have happened in her life, these things that she's had to deal with, these stressful things, like strained relations with family members and stuff. It's one thing to talk about it and know that it's happened. But when we look at the lab, like this is like physical evidence of how all of these emotional things that you've dealt with, these traumas that you've had, are affecting your physical body. And now we know how to deal with it. And as I mentioned at the beginning of this, it's not just about just looking at the labs and understanding like, oh, here's what's happening with my minerals and my cortisol and my gut and all this. Like that's one thing, and that's great. And addressing those is totally important. But now we have to go back and look in the energetic body to figure out where all these things are stored. Like they've caused the physical things to show up. So now we need to go in and uncover. And if it's a pattern, like I mentioned before, if it's patterns that are perpetuating this cycle, we need to go in and break the patterns. This is why I use so many tools for subconscious reprogramming, like hypnosis and NLP and all of these subconscious pieces to help. It's literally rewiring your brain. And it's breaking these patterns that are keeping you stuck and keeping your body kind of stuck in this dysfunctional loop. So that is basically what I want to give you today. So I gave you some tips, some kind of things to look at to address the minerals. For the gut, and for the gut and the Dutch, addressing these is a more complex things than being like, do these supplements, do these, but because really it's multiple things. And the big piece of both of these is going to be also like the emotional piece of it. Obviously there's parasite protocols you can do, and there's a ton of different like botanicals and minerals and things that you're taking to help kill off the pathogens, help your body release pathogens. You want to optimize detox and drainage. So you want to be helping your detox and drainage pathways to help you be able to release these, work on things like bioflow, so like your gallbladder, your liver, your kidneys, your lymphatic system, like all of these things need to be working optimally to help your body release things like pathogens, boosting your gut's immune system. And, healing leaky gut, like all of these can be done with supplements and food. There's like certain things to eliminate, like you want to kind of provide as much of an anti-inflammatory environment as you can. And this could be, taking out things like some big inflammatory things, and be adding in more anti-inflammatory foods. So addressing the diet, the supplements are great. And you've heard me say this many times. The diets and supplements are great, but it really is like that can get you so far. The other part has to be this emotional, energetic piece that has to happen to untangle how these other things, appeared in the first place. So I would love to hear your thoughts on this. I would love to hear if you have questions too. So please ask your questions. I always like to go back and answer questions. I'm Amanda Jen. I like to answer questions. So ask all the questions. I'll come back and answer them. And yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this and perhaps your experience with how you feel your own like stress, emotional stress or trauma is showing up in your body. If you're looking for answers and you know that it's affecting your body, then my DMs are always open. So shoot me a message, shoot me an email, and we can talk about whether it's looking at, all three of these functional labs. It's looking at just the HTMA, which is also an option. I have HTMA test package where it's just the one lab, but getting, again, I also want to make it clear, like doing the labs and getting the answers is fine. And I like giving people that because it's like the validation piece. I was telling the client I was talking to yesterday, I was telling her that it's the validation that like, A, I'm not crazy. B, all the doctors who are like, oh, you're fine, or just lose weight, or it's just your hormones, or you're getting older, like they give you all those answers. You're like, well, now I have actual answers that are actually helpful. But then two, it's like, it's really the start of it. Like that's the start of now we know what to do to take action. So it's not just looking at the labs and getting the results and seeing it. Like now we know how to take action. So I encourage you to reach out if you feel things are happening in your body that either aren't normal or you feel these patterns, like your body is showing you these patterns are showing up that are affecting you on this, physical and emotional level that need to be addressed. That's my work. That's what I do. So send me a message and I'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to Hopeful and Wholesome, y'all. If you found value in this week's episode, please subscribe on iTunes or wherever you listen to your podcast and leave a review to let me know what you thought. I'd love to know what you find useful in these episodes so I can know how to provide the most value I can to my listeners. And if you have topics you'd like to know more about, I'd love to hear those as well. So shoot me a message on Instagram, Facebook, or LinkedIn. It's @TheHopePedraza, or you can visit my website, hopefulandwholesome.com. Thanks, y'all.